When ambitious Emma Rodriguez asks her childhood friend Sebastian Cain to teach her sophistication for one night, she unleashes a passion that threatens to consume them both. What starts as a desperate plan to save her career becomes a dangerous game of desire, betrayal, and sacrifice that will change their lives forever. Welcome back, beautiful people. Today's story is equal parts drama and devotion, and trust us, you'll be hooked from the very first line. Let's dive in. Asterisk, the rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sebastian Cain's penthouse like bullets against armor, each drop catching the amber glow of Manhattan's restless lights. Emma Rodriguez stood frozen in the doorway of his kitchen, watching him move with the same effortless confidence that had made him millions before his 30th birthday. Steam rose from the pasta pot, filling the space between them with the scent of garlic and basil. But all she could taste was the metallic tang of desperation coating her tongue. 3 days had passed since Monica Chen's words had shattered her world. 3 days of replaying every conversation, every presentation, every overtime hour that had meant nothing in the face of her inexperience. Not professional inexperience, but the kind that mattered in boardrooms filled with men who expected their business partners to navigate champagne receptions and intimate dinners with the sophistication of someone who had lived, loved, and lost. "You're staring at me like I'm about to disappear," Sebastian said, without turning around, his voice carrying that hint of amusement that had charmed CEOs and venture capitalists across 3 continents. "What's eating at you, Em?" The nickname hit her chest like a physical weight. Only he had ever called her that. From the day his family moved into the modest house next to hers in Queens, she'd been 7, pigtails askew and dirt under her, fingernails from building castles in their tiny backyard. He'd been 8, all elbows and knees, speaking with a slight accent that disappeared within months as he adapted to American life with the same ruthless efficiency he now applied to hostile takeovers. "Sebastian." Her voice cracked on his name, betraying the carefully rehearsed composure she'd practiced in her reflection for hours. "I need to ask you something impossible." He turned then, wooden spoon still in his hand, and the smile that had graced magazine covers faltered as he took in her expression. The kitchen lights cast shadows across his angular face, highlighting the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. A souvenir from the car accident that had claimed his parents when he was 19. Most people assumed it was from some exotic adventure, and he never corrected them. Only Emma knew the truth, just as only she knew about the nightmares that still woke him some mornings, gasping and reaching for ghosts. You're scaring me." He set down the spoon and crossed to her in 3 quick strides, his hands finding her shoulders with the same gentle certainty he'd shown when comforting her after her father's heart attack 2 years ago. What happened? The warmth of his palms seeped through her silk blouse, and she closed her eyes against the familiar comfort of his presence. This was Sebastian before the empire, before the tailored suits and corner offices. This was the boy who had taught her to ride a bike, who had held her hair back when she was sick, who had been her anchor through every storm life had thrown at them. "The promotion went to someone else," she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze, someone with more worldly experience. Someone who understands sophisticated social dynamics. His jaw tightened, and she saw the flash of anger that had once driven him to build his company from nothing after every investor in the city had dismissed him as too young, too foreign, too hungry. "Monica Chen is a fool if she thinks you're personal. Life reflects your professional capabilities." But she's not wrong. The words tasted like ash. "I am inexperienced, Sebastian. At 24, I've never had a serious relationship. I've never traveled beyond business conferences. I've never been to the kind of events where million-dollar deals get made over whiskey and meaningful glances." He dropped his hands and stepped back, running one through his dark hair in a gesture she recognized as frustration. The pasta water began to boil over, sending hissing clouds of steam toward the granite countertops that cost more than her yearly rent. "So what are you asking me?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the wariness that crept into his green eyes. Emma took a deep breath, tasting the garlic-scented air and the weight of 20 years of friendship that she was about to gamble with a single question. Outside, the storm intensified as if the city itself was holding its breath for her answer. I need you to teach me how to be someone they can't dismiss, she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. I need you to show me how to be the kind of woman who belongs in their world. Someone confident, experienced, sophisticated. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, electric and dangerous as the lightning that split the sky beyond the windows. And how exactly do you propose I do that? He asked, though she could see in his eyes that he already knew what she was going to say. The rain continued its relentless percussion against the glass as Emma gathered every ounce of courage she possessed and spoke the words that would change everything between them. I need you to be my first. The silence that followed Emma's words stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Sebastian's face had gone completely still, the kind of calculated emptiness he wore during hostile board meetings when millions hung in the balance. The pasta water continued its violent bubbling, the only sound in a kitchen that suddenly felt vast as a cathedral. Emma. Name left his lips like a prayer or a curse. She couldn't tell which. You don't know what you're asking. But she had known since the moment the idea crystallized in Monica's office 3 days ago. She knew exactly what she was asking him to sacrifice, to risk, to become. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest as she watched him turn away, his shoulders rigid beneath the white cotton shirt that clung to muscles earned from early morning runs through Central Park. I know you think I'm being naive, she said, stepping closer until she could smell his cologne mixed with the steam from the stove. But I've thought about this, Sebastian. Really thought about it. He spun to face her, and for the first time in 20 years of friendship, she saw something dangerous flicker in his green eyes. Have you thought about what happens afterward, about how this changes everything between us? Maybe it doesn't have to change anything. The laugh that escaped him was harsh, scraping against her skin like broken glass. Can't be that innocent me. You can't ask me to touch you, to be inside you, and then pretend nothing happened when you wake up Monday morning. Heat flooded her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Couldn't look away. Not when she was asking him to save her from a life of careful mediocrity. Then maybe we don't pretend. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. That made her pulse race. Outside, the storm had moved closer, thunder rolling across the city like a warning from the gods themselves. Sebastian moved to the stove and turned off the flame with sharp, precise movements. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same tone he used to close deals worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. If we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no backing out when it gets complicated. Ain't faced her again, and she saw the exact moment he shifted from friend to something far more dangerous. I won't be your practice run, Emma. I won't be someone you experiment with and discard when you find someone more suitable. I would never, wouldn't you? He crossed to her in 2 steps, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet. His gaze this close, she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. You're asking me to teach you to be sophisticated, experienced. What happens when you meet someone at one of those champagne receptions? Someone who fits into your new world better than the boy from Queens who got lucky with some code? Accusation hit her like a slap. Is that what you think of yourself? Of us? Something raw and vulnerable flashed across his face before the mask slipped back into place. I think you're desperate, and desperate people make promises they can't keep. She should have been angry, should have walked out of his perfect penthouse and found another way to prove herself to Monica, Chen, and every other person who had ever underestimated her. Instead, she reached up and touched the scar on his face, the raised line of tissue that mapped the worst night of his life. I've kept every promise I've ever made to you, she said softly. Every single one, for 20 years. Why would I stop now? His eyes closed at her touch, and she felt him lean almost imperceptibly into her palm. When he opened them again, the careful control was gone, replaced by something that made her stomach flutter with a mixture of fear and anticipation. 3 months, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. 3 months, too. Teach you everything you think you need to know about being the kind of woman they can't dismiss. About confidence, sophistication, desire. His hand covered hers where it rested against his cheek. About what it means to be touched by someone who knows exactly how to unravel you. The promise in his words sent heat spiraling through her body, settling low in her belly like molten gold. And after 3 months, you decide. Do you take what I've taught you and walk away? Or do you admit that what's between us was always more than friendship? Thunder crashed overhead as if the universe itself was commenting on the bargain they were making. Emma looked into the face of the man who had been her constant, her safe harbor, and realized she was about to sail them both into uncharted waters. When do we start? She whispered. Sebastian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Right now is about power. About taking what you want instead of waiting for permission. Before she could ask what he meant, his mouth was on hers. Hot and demanding, and nothing like the gentle first kiss she'd always imagined. This was claiming, conquering, a preview of exactly how thoroughly he intended to ruin her for anyone else. When he finally pulled away, leaving her gasping against the kitchen island, his eyes held a promise that made her knees weak. Welcome to your education, Emma Rodriguez. I hope you're ready for what you've unleashed. 2 weeks later, Emma stood in the marble lobby of the Meridian Hotel. Her reflection multiplied endlessly in the polished surfaces that surrounded her. The red dress Sebastian had chosen hugged her curves like a second skin, silk fabric whispering secrets against her legs with every breath. She'd never worn anything so expensive, so deliberately seductive. And the woman staring back at her from the mirrors seemed like a beautiful stranger wearing her face. Stop fidgeting, Sebastian murmured against her ear, his hand settling possessively. On the small of her back, the warmth of his palms seeped through the thin fabric. A constant reminder of how thoroughly he'd been mapping her body over the past 14 days. You look incredible. The charity gala buzzed around them. Manhattan's elite gathered in their finest armor of silk and diamonds. Emma recognized faces from magazine covers and business journals. Kind of people who made decisions over handshakes that could shift entire markets. This was Sebastian's world now, had been for years. But tonight was her first time stepping into it as something more than his childhood friend from Queens. Remember what I taught you, he continued, his breath warm against her skin. Eye contact. Confident posture, and never apologize for taking up space. She nodded, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped every time he touched her. The past 2 weeks had been a masterclass in sophisticated seduction. Lessons that blurred the line between education and foreplay until she could barely tell the difference. Sebastian was a patient teacher, methodical in his approach to unraveling her inhibitions. He'd shown her how to walk in heels that could double as weapons, how to hold a wine glass to make her fingers look elegant, how to laugh in a way that drew men's attention across crowded rooms. But it was the private lessons that haunted her dreams. The way he'd mapped every sensitive spot on her neck with his mouth while teaching her about desire. How he'd pressed her against his office windows overlooking the city while explaining the intricacies of power dynamics. The careful way he'd brought her to the edge of release with nothing but his hands and his voice. Stopping just short of the complete surrender she craved. There's someone I want you to meet, he said now, guiding her toward a group of executives. Clustered near the bar, David Harrington, CEO of Global Dynamics. He's exactly the type of client Monica thinks you can't handle. Emma's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety, but she forced her shoulders back and lifted her chin. Confidence was a performance Sebastian had taught her, and she was becoming an excellent actress. David Harrington turned out to be everything she'd expected, silver-haired, expensively tailored, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He looked her over like she was a particularly interesting acquisition, his gaze lingering on the curve of her breasts before meeting her eyes. Sebastian, you didn't mention you were bringing such lovely company, Harrington said, extending a hand that held hers just a moment too long. David, I'd like you to meet Emma Rodriguez. She's Chen Marketing's rising star, specializing in international accounts. Emma felt Sebastian's hand press against her back, a subtle reminder of everything he'd taught her about commanding attention. She smiled, the expression calculated to be warm but not eager, interested but not desperate. Mr. Harrington, I've been following Global Dynamics' expansion into Southeast Asia. Your approach to navigating cultural differences while maintaining brand integrity is fascinating. Something shifted in Harrington's expression. genuine interest replacing the polite dismissals she'd grown accustomed to. "You've done your homework?" Most marketing executives barely understand the basics of international commerce. For the next 20 minutes, Emma found herself deep in conversation about market penetration strategies and cultural adaptation, her confidence growing with each nod of approval from Harrington. Sebastian remained beside her, a silent presence that somehow made her feel invincible. "I'll be honest, Ms. Rodriguez," Harrington said as their conversation wound down. "I've been looking for a new marketing partner for our European launch. Someone who understands that business happens as much at dinner tables as in boardrooms. Would you be interested in discussing this further?" Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "I'd be very interested, Mr. Harrington." "Excellent. I'll have my assistant contact you next week." He glanced at Sebastian with something that might have been respect. "You've got good taste, Cain, in business partners and otherwise." As Harrington melted back into the crowd, Emma felt giddiness bubble up in her chest. She'd done it, had proven. She could hold her own with the kind of client who would have dismissed her 2 weeks ago. "You were perfect," Sebastian said, his voice warm with pride and something deeper that made heat pool low in her belly. "I had a good teacher." She turned to face him fully, struck by how beautiful he looked in the ballroom's golden light. Scar on his face seemed less like a flaw and more like a badge of survival, proof that he'd fought for everything he had. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, holding out his hand with the same certainty he brought to everything else. The orchestra was playing something slow and romantic, couples swaying together on the polished floor like they were participating in some elaborate ritual. Emma let him lead her onto the dance floor, his arms coming around her with a familiarity that still sent shivers through her body. "You realize what just happened, don't you?" he murmured, as they moved together, his thigh sliding between hers in a way that made her breath catch. Impressed a potential client. "You proved Monica. Chen wrong about everything." His hand traced the bare skin of her back, a caress that was barely appropriate for public, but felt like a brand against her flesh. "You proved you belong in this world." The triumph should have felt sweeter, but all Emma could focus on was the way Sebastian looked at her, like she was something precious and dangerous that he wasn't sure he should touch. The awareness that had been building between them for 2 weeks crystallized into something sharp and urgent. "Sebastian," she started, but he spun her away from him before pulling her back, the movement pressing her body flush against his. "No," he said, his voice rough with the same tension that was coiling in her belly. "God, Emma, I know." The song ended, but they remained pressed together, breathing hard and staring into each other's eyes like they were the only people in the room. The careful control Sebastian had maintained for 2 weeks was cracking, and Emma could see her own desperation reflected in his face. "Take me home," she whispered, the words carrying a weight that had nothing to do with transportation. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes before he stepped back, his hand finding hers with possessive certainty. "My place or yours?" "Yours. I want to see your reaction when you finally stop being careful with me." The promise in her words hit him like a physical blow, and Emma watched the last of his restraint crumble. When he led her from the ballroom, his grip on her hand was tight enough to bruise, and she'd never felt more powerful in her life. But as they waited for the elevator, Emma caught sight of their reflection in the polished brass doors. Sebastian looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted, and the intensity of that gaze sent a chill through her chest. Because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, this had stopped being about education and started being about something far more dangerous, something that could destroy them both if she wasn't careful. The elevator doors opened like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. Emma woke in Sebastian's bed to the sound of his voice drifting through the penthouse, low and urgent in a way that made her stomach clench with unease. Pale morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting abstract patterns. Across the rumpled silk sheets that still held the scent of their desperation from the night before, she'd finally surrendered everything to him in this room. Had let him worship her body with a reverence that felt like salvation and damnation rolled into one. The memory of his hands, his mouth, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, as he moved inside her, should have filled her with warmth. Instead, cold dread settled in her chest as she recognized the tone he used only for the most delicate business negotiations. Wrapping his shirt around herself, Emma padded barefoot toward the living room, stopping just short of the doorway when she heard her own name. "No, David. I understand your concerns completely," Sebastian was saying, his back to her as he stared. Out at Central Park, he wore only pajama pants, the muscles of his shoulders tense with concentration. But Emma Rodriguez is exactly what Chen Marketing needs to compete at the international level. She's intelligent, driven, and she learns fast. Emma's blood turned to ice water in her veins. David Harrington. The client from last night, the one who'd been so impressed with her performance. "I know she seemed inexperienced," Sebastian continued, pacing now like a caged predator. "That was intentional. She's been working with a consultant to refine her approach to high-stakes clients. Someone who understands how these relationships really work." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she was surprised Sebastian couldn't hear it. "Of course the partnership benefits me too," Sebastian said with a laugh that sounded nothing like the man who'd held her through the night. "But I wouldn't have recommended her if I didn't believe she could deliver results. Emma's going to be a major player in this industry." "David, getting in early with Chen Marketing could be very profitable for Global Dynamics." Silence stretched across the penthouse as Sebastian listened to whatever Harrington was saying. Emma felt bile rise in her throat as the pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. 3 months should be enough time to solidify the arrangement, Sebastian said finally. "By then, she'll be exactly what you need, and Chen will have to give her the promotion. Everyone wins." The call ended with a soft beep, and Emma watched Sebastian set his phone on the marble coffee table with hands that weren't quite steady. For a long moment, he stared out at the city like he was seeing it for the first time. "How long have you been standing there?" he asked without turning around. Emma stepped into the living room on legs that felt like water, clutching his shirt closed at her throat. "Long enough." When he finally faced her, his expression was carefully blank, the same mask he'd worn the night she'd asked him to be her first. But now she could see the cracks in his armor, the guilt, and something that might have been regret flickering in his green eyes. "Don't." The word came out sharper than broken glass. "Don't you dare call me that. Not after what I just heard." Sebastian raked a hand through his hair, the careful composure he'd maintained for weeks, finally crumbling. "It's not what you think." "Really? Because what I think is that you've been playing me since the moment I asked for your help?" Emma's voice was deadly calm, a counterpoint to the rage building in her chest. "I think you saw an opportunity to secure a business relationship with Global Dynamics and decided to use our friendship as leverage. That's not how it started. That's how it ended, isn't it?" She laughed, and the sound was hollow enough to echo off the expensive walls. God, I'm such an idiot. All those lessons, all that careful seduction, it was just Sebastian Cain closing another deal. "Emma, please listen to me." He stepped toward her, but she held up a hand that stopped him cold. "How much?" The question hung between them like a blade. "How much is Harrington paying Chen Marketing for exclusive international representation? Because I'm betting it's enough to guarantee my promotion regardless of whether Monica thinks I'm sophisticated enough." Sebastian's silence was answer enough. "Brilliant," Emma said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to stay strong. "Absolutely. Brilliant. You get to be the hero who helped his childhood friend achieve her dreams. Harrington gets a marketing partner who's grateful enough to offer preferential treatment. And I get to be the naive little girl who never realized she was. Being managed from the very beginning, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." Sebastian's voice was raw with an emotion she could no longer trust. The call to Harrington. "Yes, I made that. But everything else, everything between us, that was real. How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to believe anything you've ever said to me?" Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of him. Did you laugh about it? About how easy it was to manipulate the desperate virgin into sleeping with you?" The accusation hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment his mask slipped completely. Emma saw pain there, genuine anguish, that almost made her want to take back the words. "I have never, not once, laughed about what's between us, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What happened last night? What's been building between us for weeks that has nothing to do with business, doesn't it? You said it yourself, Sebastian. 3 months to make me exactly what Harrington needs. Well, congratulations. Your investment paid off beautifully. Emma turned toward the bedroom, needing to gather her clothes and escape before she did something stupid like believe the devastation in his eyes. But Sebastian's voice stopped her at the doorway. I love you. The words hit her like bullets, stopping her breath and her heart and her ability to think clearly. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression so raw and vulnerable that it physically hurt to look at. I've loved you since we were kids, Emma, since before I knew what love meant, since before I had money or success or anything else to offer you. That's why I said yes when you asked for my help. Not for business, not for leverage, but because I would have done anything to have you look at me the way you looked at me last night. Stop. The word came out cracked and broken. Just stop talking. The call to Harrington was insurance, nothing more. I wanted to make sure you got the promotion you deserved, regardless of Monica's prejudices. I wanted you to have choices, to never have to compromise your integrity for advancement. By compromising it for you instead, Sebastian flinched like she'd struck him. I know how this looks. I know you have every right to hate me. But Emma, what we have, what we've always had, it's the only real thing in my life. Everything else is just business. Emma stared at him across the expanse of his perfect living room. This man who had been her anchor and her safe harbor and apparently her puppet master all along. The boy who had taught her to ride a bike looked back at her from behind the face of a stranger. Get dressed, she said finally, her voice hollow as an empty grave. We have a meeting with Monica Chen in 2 hours, and you're going to help me finish what we started. Emma, no more talking. Sebastian, no more explanations or justifications or declarations of love. We had a deal, and I'm going to see it through to the end. She met his eyes one last time, letting him see exactly what his betrayal had cost them both. After today, I never want to see you again. The silence that followed her words felt like the end of the world, and maybe it was. Maybe some betrayals were too deep to survive, some trust too shattered to repair. But Emma Rodriguez had learned something valuable in the past 2 weeks, something Sebastian's manipulations couldn't touch. She had learned how to be ruthless. Monica Chen's office felt different when Emma walked in wearing the same red dress from the charity gala, her spine straight and her chin lifted with hard-earned confidence. The afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the awards and accolades that lined every wall. But for the first time since she'd started working at Chen Marketing, Emma wasn't intimidated by the space or the woman who controlled her professional fate. Sebastian stood beside the window overlooking the city, his expensive suit perfectly tailored but unable to hide the tension in his shoulders. He'd barely spoken to her during the taxi ride from his penthouse, and Emma had been grateful for the silence. Words felt dangerous now, loaded with the potential to shatter what remained of her carefully constructed composure. Emma, Monica said, rising from behind her mahogany desk with the kind of smile that never boded well for anyone's career. I have to say, I'm surprised by your request for this meeting, and intrigued by your choice of advocate. Emma felt Sebastian's gaze on her profile, but she kept her attention focused on her boss. I wanted to discuss the international accounts position one more time. I believe there may have been some miscommunications about my qualifications. Monica's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched in a way that suggested she found Emma's newfound confidence amusing. I thought I was quite clear about my reasoning. The position requires someone with a certain level of worldly experience, someone who can navigate the complex social dynamics of international business relationships. You were absolutely clear, Emma agreed, her voice steady despite the way. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Which is why I've spent the past month working to address those concerns. She opened her portfolio and placed David Harrington's preliminary contract on Monica's desk. Watching her boss's expression shift from amusement to surprise to sharp interest as she scanned the terms. Global Dynamics wants to partner exclusively with Chen Marketing for their European expansion, Emma explained. A 3-year contract worth $12 million annually, with options for renewal and expansion into other markets. Monica looked up from the contract, her dark eyes calculating. This is impressive, Emma. Very impressive. But landing one client, even a significant one, doesn't necessarily prove it proves that I can deliver results. Emma interrupted, allowing steel to creep into her voice. It proves that sophisticated clients are willing to trust me with their most important projects. And it proves that your initial assessment was based on assumptions rather than facts. The silence that followed stretched taut as a violin string. Emma felt Sebastian shift behind her, could sense his surprise at her directness, but she didn't dare look at him. If she saw the pride in his eyes, or worse, the love he'd claimed to feel, she might lose her nerve entirely. You're right, Monica said finally, leaning back in her leather chair. I may have been too hasty in my judgment. The Global Dynamics contract alone justifies reconsidering the international position. Emma's heart leaped, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. This was the moment she'd been working toward, the validation she'd sacrificed everything to achieve. However, Monica continued, and Emma's stomach dropped at the word, "There is one thing that concerns me about this arrangement, which is..." Gaze flicked to Sebastian, then back to Emma with knowing calculation. David Harrington mentioned that you've been working with a consultant to develop your international business skills. Someone with extensive experience in high-stakes negotiations. Emma felt the trap closing around her, saw the careful way Monica was watching for her reaction. That's correct. And this consultant wouldn't happen to be Mr. Cain, would it? The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Emma felt Sebastian tense behind her, understood that Monica had somehow discovered their arrangement, and was now testing how far Emma would go to secure the position. Yes, Emma said simply, refusing to elaborate or make excuses. Monica nodded, slowly, her expression unreadable. I see. And how exactly would you characterize your relationship with Mr. Cain? Professional? Personal? Something in between? Emma closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of every choice that had led her to this room, this moment, this impossible decision. When she opened them again, her voice was clear and strong. Sebastian Cain is a business acquaintance, who provided consulting services in exchange for future considerations. Nothing more. The lie tasted like ashes on her tongue, but she forced herself to meet Monica's gaze steadily. Behind her, she heard Sebastian's sharp intake of breath, felt the way the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. See, Monica said again, this time with obvious approval. That kind of compartmentalization is exactly what international business requires. The ability to maintain professional relationships without letting personal feelings compromise judgment. Nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of 20 years of friendship. 20 years of love and trust and shared history that she was systematically destroying to prove a point. The position is yours, Emma, Monica announced, standing. To extend her hand across the desk. Congratulations. You've proven that you have exactly the kind of sophisticated approach our international clients require. Emma shook her boss's hand, smiled appropriately, and accepted the promotion she'd wanted so desperately. But all she could think about was the sound of Sebastian's breathing behind her, shallow and controlled in a way that suggested he was fighting to maintain his composure. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork, Monica continued. Your first assignment. We'll be finalizing the Global Dynamics contract. I trust you can handle that without further consultation? Absolutely, Emma replied, gathering her portfolio with hands that barely trembled. I have everything I need. Monica's smile was sharp as a blade. Excellent. Mr. Cain, thank you for your assistance in preparing Emma for this role. I'm sure your business relationship has been mutually beneficial. Emma didn't look at Sebastian as they left Monica's office together, didn't acknowledge his presence in the elevator or during the interminable walk through the lobby. It wasn't until they reached the sidewalk outside Chen Marketing that he finally spoke. Emma. Asterisk. His voice was raw, stripped of the confidence and control that usually defined him. Emma stopped walking but didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see what her betrayal had done to his face. You got what you wanted, he said, and she could hear him struggling to keep his tone neutral. Promotion, the respect, the recognition that you deserved all along. Yes, she agreed, the word barely audible over the sound of Manhattan traffic, rushing past them like a river of metal and exhaust. Was it worth it? The question hit her like a physical blow, and Emma finally turned to face him. Sebastian looked devastated, his green eyes hollow with a pain that made her chest ache. The scar on his face seemed more prominent in the harsh afternoon light, a reminder of all the ways life could leave permanent marks on the people we love. I don't know, she whispered. The first honest thing she'd said since leaving his penthouse that morning. Sebastian nodded slowly, as if her answer was exactly what he'd expected. For what it's worth, Em, I'm proud of you. You handled that meeting like a CEO, like someone who belongs in that world. Monica was right about one thing: you do have exactly the kind of sophisticated approach international clients require. The use of her nickname was a knife between her ribs, a reminder of everything she was walking away from. Sebastian, no, he said gently, holding up a hand to stop her words. You were right this morning. Some betrayals are too deep to survive. Some trust, too, shattered to repair. I understand that. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might touch her, might try to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box that made her heart stop beating entirely. I bought this the day after you first kissed me, he said, his voice soft as a confession. I knew it was crazy, knew we were supposed to be temporary, but I couldn't help myself. Been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Emma stared at the box like it might bite her. Sebastian, don't. I'm not asking you to take it, he said quickly. Not asking you for anything. Just wanted you to know that what happened between us, what I felt for you, it was never about business. It was never about anything but love. He pressed the box into her hands before she could protest, his fingers warm against her palm for just a moment before he stepped back. I hope you find everything you're looking for in your new life, he said, his voice breaking on the last word. I hope the sophistication and success and recognition make you happy. You deserve all of it and more. Emma watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the crowd of business people and tourists that flowed along the sidewalk like blood through arteries. She stood frozen on the corner where they'd said goodbye, clutching the velvet box and feeling like her world had just ended and begun simultaneously. That night, alone in her cramped apartment that suddenly felt like a mausoleum, Emma finally opened the box. The ring inside was perfect, a simple solitaire diamond that caught the light from her kitchen window and threw rainbows across the walls. Beautiful and understated, and exactly what she would have chosen for herself if she'd been brave enough to. Imagine a future where Sebastian Cain loved her back. She slipped it onto her right hand, the band fitting perfectly as if he'd somehow known her size by heart. She probably had, she realized. Sebastian paid attention to details, remembered. Everything that mattered. It was one of the things that had made him so successful in business, and one of the things that had made her fall in love with him without realizing it. Because she had loved him, she understood now, had been in love with him for years maybe, decades, without acknowledging the truth of it, even to herself. The boy next door, who had grown into a man who could command boardrooms and break hearts with equal skill, the friend who had held her through every crisis and celebrated every victory, the lover who had taught her that desire could be both salvation and destruction. Often at the same time, 6 months later, Emma sat in her new corner office, reviewing contracts for the European expansion that had exceeded everyone's expectations. Global Dynamics had been so pleased with Chen Marketing's work that they'd extended their partnership to include Asian markets, making Emma the youngest vice president in the company's history. She had everything she'd ever wanted: recognition, financial security, and the knowledge that she'd earned every bit of it through her own merit. But late at night, when the city quieted and her apartment felt too empty, she would twist the ring on her right hand and wonder what might have happened if she'd been brave enough to forgive Sebastian Cain, if she'd been strong enough to separate the man from his mistakes, to choose love over pride. She'd heard through industry contacts that he'd sold his company 6 weeks after their confrontation in Monica's office. had taken the billions from the acquisition and disappeared from New York entirely. Some said he'd moved to Europe. Others claimed he was building schools in developing countries. Emma didn't know which rumors were true, and she'd trained herself not to care. But sometimes, when she caught her reflection in her office windows. At sunset, she saw a woman who had everything she'd ever wanted and nothing she actually needed. A woman who had learned to be sophisticated and ruthless and successful, but had forgotten how to be happy. The ring caught the light as she gathered her papers for the night, and Emma allowed herself one moment of weakness. One moment to imagine a different ending to their story, one where love had been stronger than betrayal, where trust had been deeper than pride. Then she locked the dream away with all the others, straightened her shoulders, and walked out into the glittering city that had given her everything except the one thing that might have made it all worthwhile, outside her window. New York sparkled like a constellation of broken promises, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to the hearts. It had shattered in its relentless pursuit of success. Asterisk, let me know in the comments. Have you ever sacrificed love for career success? What would you have done in Emma's situation? Subscribe for more intense romance stories that explore the complex choices we make for love, ambition, and survival. The end.